Elul is a month-long holiday, or Hol month, that marks the end of one Jewish year and helps to transition into the beginning of a new one. Traditionally, it is a month of introspection, contemplation, and personal growth. Untraditionally, or at least less traditionally, Elul Unbound is a digital initiative offering up a wide variety of avenues for experimenting over the course of this month. Sign up to join Elul Unbound's email list and learn more about all of Elul Unbound's offerings by heading to judaismunbound.com/ELUL. This is a special bonus edition of Judaism Unbound. Elul Unbound number 25, Yom Kippur is coming. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lex Rofberg.
And I'm Wendy Bernstein-Lash.
And we chose a bit of a scary title today. Yom Kippur is coming. It's a strange title, maybe, but we'll tell you why in a second. So before we do, Elul Unbound is what gathers us here today. Elul is the 12th month of the Jewish year. It is the final month. It is the on-ramp month into the next year. It marks an end and a beginning at the same time. It's like Semisonic's closing time. I won't ramble on about that, but it's a magical time of year. And so we spend it doing all sorts of creative Jewish things to try and sit with a spirit of introspection, of teshuvah, of self-improvement. And that's what these Elul Unbound mini episodes are all about. We had 3 previous ones, and we encourage you to listen to those if you haven't yet. And today's is our 4th of this year's Elul Unbound. We've also got a couple dozen from past years. And the focus today is on Yom Kippur, which is a little strange because we have a few days left of Elul as we release this conversation. We have Rosh Hashanah, a pretty big old holiday that will happen before Yom Kippur. And only after 10 days will we have Yom Kippur. Why focus on Yom Kippur is kind of the question. My half answer, and then I'll pass to you, Wendy, is that I think Yom Kippur, as big as it is, as monumental as it is, it sometimes gets a little bit overlooked because I've been a person planning high holiday services, and there's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And just practically, you start prepping for the high holidays as a whole. And the first thing you have coming up is Rosh Hashanah. And so you've got months, or at the very least weeks, to consider Rosh Hashanah. And in the back of your mind, you're like, yeah, there's Rosh Hashanah and also Yom Kippur. But mostly you focus on the first one. And then, once you've actually had Rosh Hashanah, you turn to Yom Kippur. But Yom Kippur is massive. To many people, they presume it's a bigger holiday than Rosh Hashanah. There's not really a status difference in that way, but culturally, some folks see it as kind of the biggie. And so Wendy, can you talk us into Yom Kippur a little bit? Why start thinking about that and not just sort of the new year when we are in Elul?
Sure. I think that Elul and Yom Kippur are bookends with Rosh Hashanah in the middle. And the reason I think about that is because Elul is about doing teshuvah, that's a term that we've talked about, which means turning or returning, many times translated as repentance. And that's what Yom Kippur is about. So you're kind of connecting these two pieces where you're doing some introspective work about who you are, how you are being, and we get some joy in the middle of Rosh Hashanah. That being said, many of us were raised not thinking about Elul. So it was just Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But since this is Elul Unbound, and we hope that people have been thinking about Elul, it makes sense to talk about Yom Kippur, even though that's not the next holiday in our cycle.
100%. I think that there is an intuitive connection. I don't mean to suggest nobody's ever thought of this before, kids. But I stand by this way in which Yom Kippur gets a little less prep than Rosh Hashanah. We also have a culture where New Year's resolutions are a broader thing than just Jews. And so I think that soaks into a lot of folks on Rosh Hashanah either renew New Year's resolutions they made in the January New Year, or they set new ones. Yom Kippur, people fast, people hopefully work to interact with those that they have wronged and ask forgiveness. Also people are doing that beforehand. I think Yom Kippur is just a barrel of challenges for a lot of people. It's there's this notion of going to synagogue. That's how most people doing Yom Kippur do it. You go to synagogue. There is a service involving a lot of liturgy for a few hours. On Yom Kippur, there's a whole day. I mean, there's the evening prayer service called Nidre. There's the morning service and afternoon, and then there's the remembrance Yizkor. There's the concluding service in Elul. There's like a whole day of services, and part of me is always wondering, like, this is called Day of Atonement. It's like called Day of, however we translate Kippur, however we think about repentance or turning or returning. Like, the point of this is to try and right our wrongs. And we talk about righting our wrongs in the liturgy. We do like for the sins we've done in this way and the sins we've done in this other way. Wouldn't it be more logical for us to like all go to synagogue and walk around the room and like apologize to those in the room we've wronged? Like, wouldn't that be a better use of time? It feels like if that's what the day is about, we actually spend almost the entire day in traditional communities. There's like very little gap between the services praying. And it's not called Day of Praying. It's not Yom Tefillah. It's Yom Kippur. Part of me thinks we're not even really achieving the work of the holiday when we do it in traditional context. And so I'm called to think about how we would expand its observance. And I feel like a lot of that only really happens over the course of a month or 40 days, if you count Elul plus the 10 days of the high holidays. So like maybe Yom Kippur is just kind of the exclamation point. I'm not sure about all this, but I'm curious if you've got more ideas about how we could make Yom Kippur differently meaningful or more meaningful than it often is.
You know, the metaphor that's coming to me as you speak is before you plant seeds, you have to break up the ground. And so Elul is breaking up the ground. And maybe Yom Kippur is the actual planting of the seeds. I find myself wandering during the liturgy. I actually sometimes bring, if I do it in community, I bring a couple of maksarim so I can go back and forth and find something meaningful if the one that the community I'm in is not using a prayer that resonates with me or got language that resonates with me. And so I use it as a very deeply reflective time. It's like I'm held by the container of the community and I can hear things going on, but I allow myself to drift off. And like you talked about the Al-Khair, there are things in there that I probably wouldn't have put on my own personal list. But when I read the list, it's like, oh yeah, it's a reminder that there's more than just what I can think of. What I wish, because I feel like the intention of it was probably to do it in a public way. You know, going up to individuals in the community would be wonderful, but I wish we could actually like stand up and say, okay, this is what I'm atoning for. Because there's something really powerful when you take it outside of yourself and you say, look, I screwed up and I want to let this go. I want to completely purge this so that I'm not carrying it into the next year for me. And so I wish we could recraft it. There is, you know, the afternoon time where usually there isn't liturgy. And
there isn't as much.
Yeah, there isn't as much. Sorry. And so like, I haven't done this since COVID, but I usually lead a meditation, and it's a time for people to kind of really be with what's percolating up, because it does percolate stuff up. You're supposed to think about this being a little bit like looking at your own death. Maybe that's what it's like to be like, who do I want to be? What if this is my last year? Who do I want to be?
That's a huge question. Wow. I mean, that's really a cool frame on it. And like, yeah, intellectually, I think I understand Yom Kippur as a day to reflect on life and death. I struggle with what that looks like in practice, and I like that framing question of like, what if this were my last year? What would I want to do with it? I did want to look at or shine a light on a couple weeks ago on the podcast. We spoke to Zvika Krieger, and at Chochmat Halev, his community, not far from you in Berkeley, they do a version. It's not like a public proclamation because it's submitted anonymously, but people actually in real time write down anonymously, again, like wrongs they've committed and want to do repentance for. And then those are read. And so it's not abstract. It's not like these are sins that somebody could have committed. That's like what the Al-Khair is trying to do. It's like these are a set of categories of wrongs that people might have done. This is like actual folks in their community saying that they've done this, and it creates a kind of wow, this is our community. It's not some distant community. The other thing I want to mention is I really would like Jewish institutions and people who have power over secular institutions and are Jewish, like whatever. I'd like us all to consider institutional teshuvah more than we do. There are ways to right wrongs that are related to our individual actions in the world and those that we've harmed like me, myself, Lex. There are also ways in which we are part of systems, where we are part of institutions. We are part of Jewish communal institutions sometimes. All of these things, it's not that they're evil, but they err. They go wrong. And I think it would be a really great modeling for Jews writ large if it was a norm that synagogues would on Yom Kippur say, okay, during Elul, we've been spending this time considering what are some of the ways we inflict harm. Not that we're evil, not that we only inflict harm and do no good, but what are some of the common ways in which we do harm to people who are part of our communities? What are some of the ways we do harm to people who are actually our own members? What are ways in which we do harm to people who are not members but are part of our local community? What are ways in which we are participants in systems that do harm to the broader world? That would be such an amazing modeling for us to then apply to our own individual experience and to whatever our work is in secular organizations. I can imagine somebody sitting in that congregation hearing, wow, our community has marginalized people of color. Our community has sidelined victims of harm and overly centered powerful people who have done harm. Like whatever it might be, to have a litany like that, I can imagine somebody sitting in the fourth row and being like, wow, I am part of a leadership team of some other organization that I work for professionally. Wouldn't it be cool if we did this? Maybe publicly, I think ideally publicly, but even if we as a team internally spent time thinking, what are the ways that we have done harm? What are the ways we've gone wrong? I think that could be a really special part of Yom Kippur, that it wouldn't be competing with the ways in which we want to individually improve. It would actually mobilize us to think more cohesively about all the ways that we need to improve.
Wow. I think both and saying that everything needs to look at institutions and individuals need to look at and really elevate this model of we're imperfect and we've created harm and we want to acknowledge that. And so many ways that doesn't happen. And if people are part of institutions, this can be part of your work potentially, is to invite your institution, or if you're a member of an institution, to invite it to look at where's the teshuvah we need to do? What do we need to say? I just can't imagine that any institution as well as any person has nothing to say around this.
Yeah, and as long as we don't actualize that fact in liturgy, we are kind of implicitly saying that institutions don't need to do teshuvah as institutions. Each person that's part of them needs to. Like, you can go to the Torah, there is actual stuff about, okay, if our local community has done harm in XYZ way. There's examples in the Talmud given about how, like, if a community somehow thought that X, Y, or Z was permitted by Jewish law, but it's actually forbidden. So a bunch of people were doing an action that's actually forbidden by Jewish law, and they've all been operating that way. So this whole community has been operating that way. There is a procedure whereby the leadership of the community, the high priest, actually, on behalf of the whole people, brings a sin offering or a set of sin offerings. And I don't know that there was like an articulation in words of, oh, we did this wrong, we commit to not do it again. But that's kind of the implication, is like, we didn't realize we were causing harm. Now we do realize it. We're committed to not doing that anymore. A lot of institutions need to do that in a lot of different respects. And also the passive ways in which communities have failed to step up and contribute. Again, I'm not saying, oh my gosh, your typical synagogue is evil. I'm saying your typical synagogue, also your typical church. Like, I'd love a church to do this. I'd love a mosque to do this. I'd love a business, a corporation to do this. I'd love a school to do this. This is not that we are like somehow uniquely bad in Jewish life and need to self-flagellate publicly.
Mhm.
No, everybody should do this. And I strive for a Judaism that models human behaviors that would be good for the whole world to do. So my hope is that we can figure that out a little bit and work towards a norm where it wouldn't be strange for local Bethel or Shalom or Emmanuel or Sinai, or pick your common arbitrary synagogue name, to actually convene in the lead up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then on Yom Kippur, as a real punctuation, say, here are some key ways in which we did harm, unknowingly, knowingly, and we are committed to doing better on that front.
If you're a leader in some way, even a small community, maybe this is the starting place, is as the leader of that community, the head of a committee, the president of a board, to kind of take the lead on this and say, I'm aware of the ways that I've done harm, and either intentionally or unintentionally, and to stand up as a model. I just am remembering I went on a Buddhist meditation retreat, and I had been going on this particular retreat for almost 20 some years. And somewhere about halfway in, they started doing, on the last day of the retreat, the 4 teachers would literally do this, for any way that we've harmed you intentionally or unintentionally. Sylvia Boorstein was part of it, so they probably got it from the Jewish liturgy. And then they would bow down to the 200 people in a big meditation hall. It was very powerful. Like, to be able to say, we in leadership recognize that we make mistakes. So then it's therefore so much easier for the individual, and also to receive that humility. I think I would love to see us take this on as a Jewish tshuva practice.
Absolutely. I think that's really powerful to hear about the context where you did experience something like this. And it feels like one of those ideas where once you say it, you're like, how doesn't this exist already? Like, how is it? Like, I don't think I'm being particularly creative here. I think that just it makes sense to have an annual check-in moment where not only us as individuals, but us, and maybe it's on a family level, maybe it's on, like you said, a committee level, maybe it's on an institution level, maybe it would be cool to have this nationally or internationally. Like, if this were already part of the Jewish calendar, we'd look at it and be like, oh yeah, that's like, that makes sense. It's not like a 21st century new notion. It's something that we should already have. And I feel like it's not even necessarily a creation from nothing. It's like fixing something that should have been there all along. So I hope that folks actualize this. Like, please be in touch if you bring this in some form to your community. I'd love to hear different ways in which folks model it. I'm not convinced the best way for this to happen is like in the middle of the Yom Kippur service with the hundreds of people, you do that. Like, maybe that's one strategy. Another strategy would be to do this in smaller groups where folks can have like conversation about it, and it's not just like broadcast to a big room. Another version would be doing this through individual conversations about the institutional harms. Like, there's so many ideas. I don't know what the best way or the best many ways are. And so I hope you'll be in touch with us as you consider this. And related, I hope that you will join us for our very last gathering of this month before the new year starts. It's a combo, Elul Unbound and Shabbat Unbound. Shabbat Unbound being our new initiative that's 12 months long and one Shabbat service. We're doing a year-long Friday night service that started last month in August and will continue till next July. And we're really going deep into one prayer each time, as opposed to trying to cover like 15 or 20 prayers really quickly, which is what happens in a lot of synagogue spaces. So this last gathering is going to be a Shabbat-focused gathering with some liturgy. We're going to hone in on a particular prayer, and we're going to consider how that connects to the close of Elul and the entry into the new year. So we hope you'll join us. You can go to JudaismUnbound.com/Elul and click on the Zoom gatherings area to sign up, and we can't wait to see you there. So thanks so much for listening, and with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.